After I ended things with this girl and entered into the 8th grade, I was still in the beginning stages and woes of puberty and really noticing my body, and the first thing that caught my eye was my belly and my developing man bosoms. I wasn't comfortable with myself and my body, and I didn't want to even think about touching other people because it made me feel self-conscious that nobody would ever want to touch me. And a boy at Sunday school actually took advantage of that vulnerability when he repeatedly patted and squeezed my chest. And even when it caused me visual discomfort, he continued doing it to make the other boys laugh. And what scared me was that the teacher, who was often a man, didn't do anything to stop it. This is what actually made me start falling away from the church. I didn't feel safe nor loved. And within the next year, or the next couple years, I can't remember, but my feelings were validated during Sunday school one day. I was leaning back in a chair next to an open window because, well, who didn't want to find comfort in those hideous things? They were flat and cold and not at all kind for the vertebrae. Much like preparing the sacrament. Preparing it involves bending over a knee-length table for long minutes with a large gut and a larger stature to make sure that each piece of bread was torn up and placed into the trays. And if I dropped a piece, I remember feeling judged when I did, and then wanting to kill myself after I got to sit down and straighten my back. Those days were unpleasant, but back to that Sunday school morning. There was a stake leader looking into the building at me with that creepy Mormon smile. You know it. And you'll know how much it screams serial killer or stalker when I do it. Unsettling, isn't it? But anyway, unnerved, I looked back at the teacher to ignore the stake leader to the best of my ability, but all of a sudden an arm reached through the window and grabbed me right above my thigh. Everyone else laughed at my shock, but I was close to crying. Nobody said anything in my defense. Nobody told the stake leader that what he did was inappropriate. They just did the same thing that they did when I was getting groped in class. Nothing. When I was a little kid, I watched a PSA in church about stranger danger and child molestation, and all this grabbing on my body screamed, "Danger, danger, danger!" And looking back at it now, I'm unsure if either the boy or the grown man meant to do anything non-consensual with me. That they were just trying to either get a rise out of me or just scare me for fun. But I don't know. I didn't see it that way. And I didn't want to risk anything happening to me. And so I fought hard some days to make sure that I wouldn't go back. Sometimes I faked being sick, and sometimes I locked myself in my room, but gave in out of fear of punishment. I hardly played with my trains anymore, but I still had things to lose. But every time I went, I made sure that I was seated far away from that boy and left the window shut whenever I sat and just imagined what the outside looked through the clouded glass. I hated the windows. I hated the buildings. They all looked and smelled the same to me, and the walls of each building I went to had the same horrific rough carpet etched into them. I can't count the rug burns on my arms I suffered in the often crowded halls going to different segments of Sunday school, or how many times they mess up my nice clothes. Granted, I don't like dressing up in formal clothing that much anymore, but still, it was awful. And as a little kid with a bedtime at 8 o'clock with afternoon church, which lasted 5 or 6 hours back then, that started at 2, sucked all the fun out of the day for me. I actually remember one day while getting ready for church that I was adamant about not going. And while my mom was putting on my tie, I boldly stated that I would follow in Satan's way and not go to church anymore. But when she said how sad it would make her, I apologized and went up anyway because I love my mom, and of course I hate making her sad. I was only a little kid, and I didn't understand what I was saying. However, I do believe that was as genuine as I ever was for the first time in my life. Now, before the window incident, when I was still in 8th grade, I was coerced into going on trek. I said multiple times that I didn't want to go out there because I was overweight and there would be a lot of physical activity involved. But my parents insisted that I went because I would regret missing out on this experience. After I continued to refuse, they threatened me with more punishment if I didn't go. I even begged my mother to let me go during the dark and early morning where we were getting ready to leave. I was tempted to just walk home, but I didn't want to get into any other trouble from my parents or a potential rapist who saw a slightly unripe yet delightfully pudgy victim. Now, for everyone who doesn't know, trek is basically a spiritual reenactment of the wondrous experiences of the Mormon pioneers who traveled to the West. All these included pulling a large handcart full of large buckets of personal belongings, tents, and various items through a rough and rugged desert, risking hypothermia and or heat stroke, dehydration, frostbite, illness, and swarms of blood-sucking, virus-spreading insects, and all from the tender ages of 14 and up. And this week was expecting hard rainstorms. And the very first night, we had a heavy storm that collapsed the tent and kept me up in a trailer full of disturbed bugs that either ate me alive or screeched in my ears. Going into the second or third day, I was absolutely miserable. And during the last walk of the day, my feet started cramping up in ways that I never felt before. It wasn't until after the trek that I learned that I, in fact, had flat-foot syndrome. And so during the last few days of the experience, I was placed into a cart and dragged along with all our other stuff. I felt so bad for those who had to pull me, but it felt so good to get off my feet. That is until we got to our campsite. It was disgusting. I can't remember if we torched it or not for a bonfire, but there was a big soggy pile of sticks and weeds and dead possums that made the entire area smell like sweat and canned spinach. But after getting the tent and getting my sleeping bag set up, I couldn't care less about anything else. And I was just about to take a quick nap when one of the young men leaders walked in. He was in his late 20s or early 30s, and I think he was concerned about me. And so we talked, and that turned into a long conversation that lasted a few good minutes. And the entire time, his shirt was off. I couldn't help but just stare at this man. The conversation that we had is still a blur to me, but something reawakened inside of me that I hadn't felt since that blonde boy years ago. But this time it was coupled with my teen angst and sprouting adolescence and all the shame of the LDS church. And so, not wanting to deal with any of that, I tried to ignore him the best I could after trek. My brother and I even came up with a big family reunion lie to get out of various activities with the young men, which gave me some relief to be away from the man, because when he was around, I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I often couldn't stop looking at him. I wanted him to get away from me, but because I didn't like the feelings he stirred in me. I was raised not to feel or think that way towards other males, but still, I wanted him. I wanted him so much, even though I knew that it was wrong in the eyes of the church. The man would eventually move, providing me with some relief, but still, my brother and I kept up our deception. But the big lie fell into hell when the bishop asked our parents about it one day during a meeting. I swear, you could have put coal in our butts and gotten, like, I don't know, platinum or something much more or less precious than diamonds. Except that it wouldn't be precious, it would be making money from the asses of children, and is usually frowned upon in good societies. But needless to say, we both got in trouble for lying to the bishopric. And all that And all that I can remember from the outcome was my dad saying, "You can't lie to the bishop!" Which apparently you can. I lied my butt off to bishops multiple times to get myself out of trouble, or keep myself in good graces with the ward in Utah. I even lied during temple interviews where the bishopric had to determine if I was worthy enough to enter the temple, as if they were supposed to have the power to read my mind or something, which they were pretty much supposed to. The bishop was supposed to have the power of discernment, to tell when someone is sinning until the 2 cows came to the ark before the flood, or whatever, something like that. But personally, I quickly found that to be a big load of crap. Because my brother and I got away with escaping weeks of activities and campouts that we just weren't in the mood for because we lied. My older brother was my best friend when we lived in Utah. Even with 4 other kids in the house, it was always the 2 of us against the world. We would have sleepovers in each other's rooms where we would have in-depth conversations at night, or just stay up late watching Adult Swim. I think we both needed to rebel a little, as we both had it pretty rough while growing up in the church with so many rules and expectations that simply didn't appeal to us. Especially in Utah, as closeted gay boys from the outside of the motherland, while surrounded by hardcore LDS conformists who knew each other their whole lives and were related to each other one way or another. It was kind of gross. But I think we both knew that we didn't really fit in with a lot of people for some underlying reasons that we couldn't or wouldn't begin to dig into until years later after we came out. My brother didn't admit his true feelings to himself and others until after we both grew up and he began to find true happiness. Yeah, he did with a man who he loves so much. He would have never found such joy and authentic life until he was finally away from the church's influence and around other sorts of people from different backgrounds in the Navy. But during the time that I started to come out, he became hostile with me out of jealousy. He wanted to come out so much, but he couldn't because he wanted to follow the plan of salvation and was planning to go on a mission in Oregon before marrying a girl he crushed on the same way that I did. She was someone who could help him fulfill that plan. Even if he had other feelings for other men, he thought he could have a fulfilling relationship with her because she was also and is still one of his best friends. But eventually he got smart and broke things up with her because, well, he did get smart and broke things off with her because things were getting too serious. And I think it was mostly because he didn't want her to wait for him while he was doing naval training or when he would actually begin to serve. But I think he also did it because he didn't want to hurt her or any children that they might have had if he chose to come out later after they would have gotten married. To this day, he's told me multiple times how grateful he is for me. The times he and his partner could meet together with our family without unwanted tension, the cushioning that I provided that helped and inspired him to come out with the least bit of backlash I endured, and the happiness he has in his life, which is always so touching to hear, especially after my own experience coming out.